The crash echoed through the glass-walled conference room like an explosion. For a split second, no one breathed. My prototype, 6 months of late nights, 12 redesigns, and 2 maxed-out credit cards worth of materials lay in jagged pieces across the polished floor. Garbage. Mr. Huxley, our CEO, spat, his face red with rage. This is what you've been wasting company resources on? You're a waste of salary, Michelle. The room went still. The client, Mr. Raymond Carter, founder of one of the largest rehabilitation tech companies in the country, watched silently. His expression was unreadable, his hands folded neatly on the table. Around him, our senior engineers and project leads avoided my eyes, their faces pale. I couldn't move. My mind refused to process the scene. The shattered parts, the adaptive joint frame, the carbon fiber exoskeleton, the delicate mechanical pulleys, all of it represented me. My effort, my belief, my future. And now it was just debris under Mr. Huxley's shoes. Sir? I managed, my voice trembling. You didn't even let me explain the calibration. He cut me off with a wave. Explain? To who? Do you see yourself standing here, embarrassing this company in front of our biggest client? Laughter rippled from one of the executives, a nervous, sycophantic sound. I felt my cheeks burn. But then something happened I didn't expect. Mr. Carter turned to me, calmly, deliberately. His eyes, sharp and observant, studied the scattered pieces, then lifted to meet mine. May I have your contact details, please? He asked. The room froze again. Even Huxley blinked. My contact? I stammered. Yes, Carter said, extending a hand. For follow-up. I hesitated only a second before pulling one of my personal cards from my notebook. My hands were shaking. I handed it to him directly, watching as he slipped it into his jacket pocket with quiet precision. Huxley forced a smile. Mr. Carter, don't worry. We'll have a real team start from scratch. Michelle's little experiments don't represent our company's standards. Carter's eyes never left mine. I see, he said evenly. Then I'll be in touch. That was it. He stood, shook hands mechanically with the others, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded to me like the end of everything. Huxley turned on me instantly. Clean this up, he barked. And Michelle? Take the rest of the day off. HR will schedule your reassignment. I knew what that meant. A demotion, or worse, being quietly pushed out. I knelt down, my throat tightening as I picked up the broken fragments of my work. Each piece cut into my palms, tiny reminders of every hour I'd believed I was building something meaningful. Leave it, Huxley snapped. Maintenance will handle it. These are custom parts, I whispered. He smirked. For a custom failure. Then he walked away. When the room emptied, I stayed on my knees, staring at the mess. For a long time, all I could hear was the faint hum of the AC and the echo of my heartbeat. This wasn't supposed to happen. My design, a fully mechanical mobility assist frame, didn't rely on power or software. It could have worked anywhere. In hospitals, in war zones, in remote clinics without electricity. It could have changed lives. And now it was gone. I sat on the floor until the janitor entered with a broom. You okay, miss? He asked softly. I nodded, even though I wasn't. I gathered the few undamaged pieces into a small box and walked out without looking back. Outside, the city felt louder than usual. Cars blared, people hurried past, and I stood there, invisible among them, clutching the box like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name on the screen. Raymond Carter. I froze. Hello? I answered, trying to steady my voice. Ms. Alvarez, he said, his tone measured. I'd like to speak further about your design. Privately, my pulse quickened. I don't understand. Mr. Huxley? Mr. Huxley, he interrupted, made it clear what he values. I'm interested in what you built. I gripped the box tighter. I can't share company property. I'm not asking for schematics, Carter said. Just conversation. I believe your concept has potential. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. at my office. No materials, no designs, just ideas. Before I could reply, the line went dead. I stood there in the middle of the street, rain beginning to fall, the box of broken parts pressed against my chest. It wasn't over. It couldn't be over. That night, I laid the salvaged pieces on my kitchen table, each one glinting under the dim light. My hands still shook, but not from fear anymore. From something sharper. Resolve they had taken my dignity, my recognition, and almost my belief in myself. But not my mind. Not my invention. And if Mr. Huxley thought he could destroy me in front of the world, he was about to learn what I was capable of building in the shadows. The next morning, I woke to the gray light of dawn and the sound of rain tapping softly against my window. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Huxley's hand smashing my prototype, the pieces flying in slow motion. Then I'd see Mr. Carter's face, calm, thoughtful, unshaken. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the call, that someone like Raymond Carter wouldn't really be interested in me, an engineer whose career had just imploded in a single meeting. But at 9:58 a.m., I stood outside his company's headquarters, a sleek glass building on the riverfront, clutching my umbrella and trying not to look like someone whose entire life had just fallen apart. The receptionist smiled politely. "Mr. Carter is expecting you, Ms. Alvarez." 11th floor, when the elevator doors opened, he was already waiting. No assistants, no formalities, just him. "Michelle," he said, offering a hand. "Thank you for coming." His office overlooked the city. It was minimalist, with sketches of prosthetic designs framed along one wall. "I'm not going to waste your time," he began, motioning for me to sit. "Yesterday, I saw something that shouldn't have been dismissed. That prototype. You were onto something. A mechanical solution that doesn't rely on power or electronics. You were thinking globally, not just commercially," I hesitated. "Mr. Carter, the design technically belongs to the company. Anything I built while employed is theirs. Yes," he finished. "I know how these contracts work. I'm not asking for blueprints or proprietary files. I just want to hear what you see when you think about mobility." That question stopped me. Nobody had ever asked it like that before. Not my colleagues, not my bosses. I found myself talking about accessibility in rural areas, about how electronic prosthetics fail when batteries die, about how a simple, durable design could restore independence to people who had been left behind by modern tech. Carter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward. "I want you to have a space to keep developing this idea, independently. My foundation supports engineers who create practical solutions for real-world challenges. We'll provide tools, workshop access, even advisors if you need them. No contracts yet, just a chance to build freely." My instinct was to say no. It sounded too good to be real. "If my company finds out, they won't," he said calmly. "You won't use their data or resources. Just your mind." I exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel impossible. "I'll do it," I said quietly. That evening, I took the metro across town to a small industrial space Carter had arranged, a shared workshop used by independent engineers and fabricators. It wasn't fancy, but the air smelled like metal, resin, and possibility. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I sat at my corporate desk, assigned to meaningless process reports that no one would ever read. Huxley barely looked at me, but I could sense he was watching, waiting for me to quit. By night, I built. Carter's team had introduced me to a machinist named Leon, a quiet older man who'd spent 30 years repairing medical equipment in developing countries. He watched me struggle one night with a stubborn joint mechanism and said, "You're over-engineering it. It needs to survive dust, rain, kids kicking it. Think simpler." That sentence reshaped everything. I stripped the design back to its core, A frame that could be repaired with a wrench and a screwdriver, adjustable without electronics, adaptable to different bodies. Each night I left the workshop exhausted but alive. For the first time since joining Huxley Dynamics, I felt like an engineer again. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I nearly lost everything. I was at my desk when an email popped up from HR, mandatory review meeting. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. My stomach dropped. I opened the message. Vague wording, no agenda, requested presence. But I recognized the timing. Tomorrow was the quarterly review with the board. Huxley had probably decided to make an example of me before the executives. That night, I went to the workshop anyway. Leon looked up as I entered, rain dripping from my coat. Long day? I nodded, tightening my ponytail. Might be my last day at that company. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I worked for hours, tuning the adaptive suspension system, adding a dust-sealed joint that clicked perfectly into place. When I stepped back at 2 a.m., covered in grease and fatigue, the prototype stood finished. Functional. Beautiful. It wasn't company property. Every part had been machined from scratch, every measurement recalculated from memory. It was mine. I snapped a few photos, uploaded the specifications to a secure drive, and sat on the floor beside it, listening to the hum of the workshop. Tomorrow, they might fire me. But tonight, I'd rebuilt what they tried to destroy. Before leaving, I sent one short message to Carter. It's ready. He replied instantly. Perfect timing. Bring it tomorrow to the Industry Advancement Forum at 2 p.m. Huxley will be there. My breath caught. Tomorrow, I might lose my job. Or I might finally be seen. Either way, something was about to break again. But this time, it wouldn't be me. The morning of the forum began with silence. No rain, no city noise. Just the low hum of nerves under my skin. I hadn't slept at all. The prototype stood in my living room, gleaming faintly in the early light. Every joint and hinge caught the sun like a promise. At 8:30, I put on my only tailored suit and tied my hair into a low bun. Then I slipped the mechanical frame, my rebuilt design, carefully into its protective case. My hands trembled as I latched it shut. Before heading to the forum, I still had one obligation left. The HR meeting at Huxley Dynamics. The office was too quiet when I arrived. People avoided my eyes, as if they already knew what was coming. The receptionist gave a rehearsed smile. They're waiting for you in conference room B. Inside, Mr. Huxley sat at the head of the table with 2 HR representatives. The mood was formal, almost sterile. Michelle. Huxley began smoothly, as if yesterday's humiliation had never happened. We've reviewed your recent performance and decided that your current role doesn't align with company priorities. We're offering you a reassignment with reduced scope, or a separation package. I stared at him. You're demoting me? He gave a sympathetic half smile. I'm offering you stability. After what happened, some might say I'm being generous. Something inside me went cold. You mean after you destroyed my work in front of a client? Huxley's expression hardened. You're out of line. That project was unsanctioned, over budget, and fundamentally flawed. I took a slow breath. Then why did the client ask for my contact details? That got him. For just a second, his jaw tightened. Carter doesn't understand the market. His foundation makes donations, not progress. Don't get any ideas, Michelle. You signed a non-compete and confidentiality agreement. You try anything, and I'll make sure your career ends here. I held his gaze. You already tried. He didn't like that. His eyes narrowed. You have until Monday to decide. Reassignment or resignation, I stood. Thank you for the clarity, sir. Then I left. By the time I reached the industry forum at 1:45 p.m., the tension in my chest had built into a solid weight. The event was held in a sprawling convention center near the harbor. Banners lined the entrance. Innovation for global accessibility. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Booths displaying high-end robotics, exoskeleton prototypes, gleaming prosthetic limbs powered by AI. Everything shimmered with screens and electricity. My mechanical design, by contrast, looked almost humble. Mr. Carter met me near the entrance, wearing the same calm expression as always. "You made it," he said. "I almost didn't. Good thing you did." He smiled faintly. "You're our surprise guest." "What do you mean, our?" "You'll see." He led me through the maze of displays to the main auditorium. At the center stood a small demonstration platform. Engineers, investors, and healthcare leaders filled the seats. On the stage, a host was introducing the afternoon session. When I saw who sat in the front row, my pulse spiked. Mr. Huxley, perfectly composed, chatting with two board members. Carter leaned toward me. "He doesn't know you're presenting. Stay calm." Before I could react, the host's voice boomed. "Our next demonstration is from an independent engineer whose approach to mobility may redefine what accessibility means worldwide. Please welcome Michelle Alvarez." For a moment, I couldn't move. The crowd's polite applause echoed like static. Then I felt Carter's hand on my shoulder. "Go." I stepped onto the stage. My legs felt wooden, but my voice, surprisingly, didn't shake. "Good afternoon," I began. "This design is called the AURA frame. It's a fully mechanical mobility system that functions without power, software, or charging. It adapts to terrain and user weight using simple physics. No batteries, no circuits, just engineering." Gasps and murmurs spread as I unveiled the prototype. The frame unfolded smoothly, the joints adjusting automatically as I demonstrated. I explained the mechanics, the load distribution, the self-locking joints, the sealed bearings designed for dust resistance. "This can be manufactured at 1/3 the cost of electronic models," I said, "and maintained anywhere in the world with a wrench and basic tools." I invited a volunteer from the audience, a man using a cane, to test it. He hesitated, then stood, curiosity overcoming caution. When he placed his hands on the frame and began to walk, the system adjusted instantly to his stride. The audience leaned forward. The man smiled. "It's effortless," he said softly. A ripple of applause spread through the hall. I caught sight of Huxley's face. Shock first, then fury. After the demonstration, questions poured in. Doctors asked about adaptability, investors about patents. I answered each one steadily, explaining that the design was independent, personally developed, and open to collaboration. When the applause finally died down, Carter joined me on stage. "Thank you, Michelle," he said into the mic. "Innovation doesn't always need electricity. It just needs courage." The audience stood, clapping. Cameras flashed. Huxley didn't move. As soon as the session ended, he pushed through the crowd, face pale, eyes burning. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. "Proof," I said quietly, "that you broke the wrong prototype." He looked around. Reporters, cameras, his board members whispering. And for the first time, he looked afraid. 30 minutes later, as I packed up my equipment backstage, my phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Michelle." Huxley's voice was low, desperate. "We need to talk. Please, don't sign anything with Carter. Come back to the office. I'm begging you." I paused, watching the crowd still buzzing outside. It was strange hearing him beg. And in that moment, I realized the power he'd used to control me had never really been his. It had always been mine. The night after the forum, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages from former coworkers, LinkedIn requests, emails from journalists, even old university professors who had seen the demonstration online. It was surreal. But between all the noise, one message stood out. From Mr. Huxley, 11:47 p.m. "We need to meet first thing tomorrow. There are serious legal implications for what you did." I read it twice, my stomach tightening. Legal implications. Of course, he wouldn't go down quietly. By morning, the story had spread across multiple tech news outlets. Independent engineer showcases groundbreaking non-electric mobility frame. My name in the headline, my face in the photos, my prototype front and center. They called it a quiet revolution in assistive technology. And behind those articles, I could feel the growing panic inside Huxley Dynamics. At 9 a.m., my former colleague Priya called. "Michelle, are you okay?" "Things are insane here." The board called an emergency meeting. Huxley's losing it. I tried to steady my voice. "Did they say why?" "They're furious. Carter's Foundation contacted them last night, apparently offering partnership talks, but only if you're involved. The board's demanding explanations, and Huxley's spinning stories faster than ever." I sighed. "Let me guess. He's saying the prototype was company property?" "Exactly. But the documentation doesn't match. There's no record of any internal design submission under your name or his. He told people you abandoned the concept months ago." "Of course he did." "Be careful, Michelle. He's dangerous when he feels cornered." By 10:30, my email pinged again. From Board Secretary. Subject: Attendance requested emergency executive session. 12 p.m. Your presence is requested regarding the Aura frame demonstration and intellectual property inquiry. I stared at the screen. They wanted me there. Carter called moments later. "They'll try to intimidate you," he said evenly. "Keep calm. You have the truth and documentation. That's all you need." I took a cab across town to the company headquarters I'd left only days earlier. As the elevator climbed, I felt the same knot in my stomach I used to feel before every review meeting. Except this time, the fear was different. Sharper. Controlled. When the doors opened, 2 security guards escorted me to the executive boardroom. The air inside was heavy. Around the long table sat the board members, the general counsel, and at the far end, Mr. Huxley. His face looked strained, sleepless eyes, forced composure. "Ms. Alvarez," the chairwoman began, "thank you for coming on short notice. We have questions about the AURA prototype you presented yesterday." I nodded. "Of course." Huxley jumped in immediately. "Before we begin, I'd like to clarify that Ms. Alvarez's design work was developed during her employment under company resources. Her public presentation was unauthorized and in violation of her contract." The chairwoman raised a hand. "We'll hear all sides." She turned to me. "Ms. Alvarez, your response?" I met her gaze. The design presented at the forum was my independent work, built entirely outside company hours and with personal or third-party resources. The concept predates my employment and is fully documented in my graduate research. The general counsel adjusted her glasses. "Do you have proof of that?" "Yes," I said, handing over a folder. Inside were dated schematics, thesis excerpts, and time-stamped design notes from 3 years ago. These documents show the development timeline and the original adaptive joint concept. Huxley leaned forward, voice rising. "This is irrelevant." She still used company methodology and exposure gained through our clients. That's theft of opportunity. One of the board members frowned. "Mr. Huxley, is it true that you presented similar mechanical mobility concepts at last month's healthcare summit as your own?" Huxley blinked. "That was an internal strategy update." The chairwoman turned to another member. "We've reviewed the transcript from that presentation. The phrasing, 'my team's abandoned mechanical prototypes,' appears to refer to Ms. Alvarez's work." The room went silent. Huxley's jaw flexed. "You're misinterpreting it." I was summarizing our direction, not claiming ownership. Carter, who had been silent until now, spoke from the side of the room. "With respect, Mr. Huxley, your direction almost buried technology that could change thousands of lives. If Michelle hadn't rebuilt it, you'd still be calling it impractical." The board chair nodded slowly. "It seems the situation goes beyond a contract issue. It speaks to leadership judgment color drained from Huxley's face." "You can't be serious. I've run this division for 8 years." "Then you should understand accountability." she said quietly. Effective immediately, your administrative access is suspended pending a full review. The words hit like a thunderclap. Huxley stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. This is ridiculous. You're taking her side? A junior engineer who went rogue? No one responded. The silence was answer enough. Security escorted him out. He didn't look back. After he left, the chairwoman turned to me. Miss Alvarez, we owe you an apology. The board recognizes the potential of your design. We'd like to discuss forming a new division dedicated to sustainable mechanical mobility, under your leadership, in partnership with Mr. Carter's foundation. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Everything, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, the shattered prototype, crashed back in a wave. I accept, I said finally, my voice steady. Carter smiled faintly. Good. Then let's build something that lasts. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. The city looked the same, but nothing felt the same. For the first time, I wasn't an employee fighting for approval. I was the one setting the direction. And as I looked up at the skyline, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes justice doesn't come through revenge. It comes through visibility, when the truth stands on its own, undeniable and unbreakable. 3 months later, I walked through the new research facility for the first time. It wasn't glamorous, just a converted warehouse on the edge of the city, but it hummed with purpose. The walls were lined with sketches, 3D models, and half-assembled frames. The sound of drilling and laughter filled the air. We'd named it AURA Labs, after the frame that started it all. Carter's foundation had provided the initial funding, and the company board, after several long negotiations, had signed off on the partnership. What they hadn't expected was how quickly the project would take off. Within weeks, requests came in from clinics, rehabilitation centers, and NGOs from all over the world. People weren't asking for luxury devices. They were asking for solutions. I stopped by one of the workbenches where Leon, the machinist who had helped me rebuild in secret, was tightening a bolt on a new prototype. He looked up, wiping his hands. Hard to believe, huh? A few months ago, we were working under flickering lights in a rented workshop. And hiding from corporate spies, I added with a smile. He chuckled. Now look at you, Director Alvarez. The title still felt strange. I didn't feel like a director. Just someone who finally had the chance to build without being silenced. At noon, I joined Carter in the meeting room. A pile of reports covered the table. Manufacturing costs, field test feedback, partnership requests. The Kenya trials came in, he said, handing me a folder. 94% success rate in rough terrain. Repairs done locally, 0 power failures. My throat tightened as I flipped through the photos. Kids using the adaptive frames to walk to school, adults traversing muddy roads to reach clinics. These weren't numbers anymore. They were lives. Carter watched me quietly. You should be proud, Michelle. You did this? No, I said, closing the folder. We did this. Every person who believed it was possible when it looked like failure. He smiled. Still humble. Still learning. I corrected. That afternoon, a visitor arrived unexpectedly, Priya from my old company. She looked nervous when the receptionist showed her in. I hope it's okay that I came, she said. Of course, I said, motioning her to sit. How are things over there? She hesitated. Different. The board brought in an interim CEO. They're reviewing all active projects. Huxley, well, he tried to start his own firm. It's not going well. Word travels fast. I nodded slowly. Part of me felt satisfaction, but it wasn't joy. More like closure. I'm sorry it turned out that way, I said honestly. He wasn't always wrong, just blinded by ego. Priya smiled faintly. You're kinder than most would be. She paused, then added, People talk about you a lot, you know. Some as a cautionary tale, others as an inspiration. Let's hope the right story sticks. Before she left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note signed by several engineers from my old department. Thanks for showing us that good ideas don't die just because someone else can't see them. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my notebook. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind. The workshop lights cast long shadows across the floor, just like that night months ago when I rebuilt the first prototype in secret. I traced my fingers along one of the new frames, sleeker now, lighter, but still built on the same principle: simplicity, reliability, dignity. Sometimes when people talk about revenge, they picture fire and destruction, making the other person lose what they took from you. But standing there, surrounded by creation, I realized my revenge had already happened. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply built something they couldn't ignore. The next week, our labs hosted an open demonstration for journalists and investors. This time, I didn't tremble when I stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed, but I didn't feel exposed. I felt grounded. 6 months ago, I began. A prototype was destroyed in front of a client. At the time, I thought it was the end of my career. But sometimes when something breaks, it's not a failure. It's a signal to rebuild better. I held up the new model. These devices are now being distributed to clinics in 12 countries. They run without power, without complex parts, and can be repaired by local technicians. That's the power of engineering that serves, not just impresses. The applause came slowly at first, then grew into a standing ovation. Somewhere in the crowd, I saw Priya smiling, and next to her, unexpectedly, was the chairwoman of Huxley Dynamics, nodding in quiet approval. After the event, I stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and orange. The city felt lighter somehow, as if all the noise had softened. Carter joined me on the steps. "So," he said, "what's next?" I looked at the skyline and smiled. "We build. And this time we make sure no one gets left behind." He nodded. "That's a mission worth keeping." As he walked away, I stood for a long moment, breathing in the cool evening air. Everything that had once been broken, my confidence, my reputation, my creation, had been rebuilt stronger. And I realized that revenge wasn't the real ending. Creation was. Because when you stop fighting to be seen and start building something undeniable, you don't need to shout. The world will see you anyway. The lilies on my kitchen counter hadn't even wilted when I walked into the building that had once felt like a second home. The automatic doors opened with their familiar hiss, releasing that sterile, lemon-scented air that usually calmed me. But that morning, it only made my stomach turn. It had been 5 days since I buried my mother. 5 days since I'd stood in a black dress beside a wooden coffin, pretending to be composed while every part of me wanted to crumble. My mother had been my anchor, my quiet encourager through 14 years of climbing the corporate ladder. And now she was gone. And I'd returned to the only place I knew how to function. Except, as I stepped onto the executive floor, something was wrong. The plaque outside my office, Claire Donovan, Director of Strategic Operations, was gone. In its place was a strip of bare metal, adhesive residue still visible beneath the fluorescent lights. My door was open, and inside, 2 janitors were stuffing my things into black trash bags. "What are you doing?" I managed, my voice brittle. One of them froze mid-motion, clutching the framed photo of my mother and me from my desk. "We were told to clear it out, ma'am." Orders from HR orders? I stepped closer, staring at the pile of my life. Research binders, notebooks, my laptop, even the glass award I'd received last quarter for leading the firm's biggest merger. All dumped together like garbage. A familiar voice spoke behind me. "Claire, you're not supposed to be here yet." I turned. It was Darren, the new head of HR. His tone clipped, rehearsed. The same man who'd sent flowers to my mother's funeral. Cheap ones with the company logo on the card. "I took personal leave," I said quietly. "It was approved." It was. But things have changed. He gestured toward my dismantled office. While you were away, the board decided to make some structural adjustments. Your position's been filled. Filled? I repeated, trying to process the word. By who? He hesitated. Ethan Caldwell. Effective immediately, I blinked. Ethan, my former assistant. 26 years old, charming, ambitious, and utterly unqualified to manage the department I built from the ground up. I had mentored him, defended him, even helped him get his MBA. Ethan? I said softly. You replaced me with my assistant? Darren's jaw tightened. It wasn't personal. The company needed a fresh approach. A fresh approach. That was their code for cheaper labor and fewer questions. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat echoing the same realization. They had waited until I was grieving, until I was at my weakest, to cut me out. My voice shook, but I refused to let it break. Where's my data? My reports? My laptop? All intellectual property has been reassigned to Mr. Caldwell, he said flatly. You'll receive your severance by mail. Severance. That word stung worse than anything else. 14 years of loyalty reduced to a severance package. For a long moment, I said nothing. Just stood there, looking at the bags of my life piled at my feet. The photo of my mother lay face down on top, her smile hidden behind cracked glass. I exhaled slowly and straightened. All right, I said finally. I understand. Darren's expression softened, relieved. I know this is difficult, Claire, but it's best if you... Don't worry, I interrupted, meeting his gaze. I won't cause a scene. And I didn't. I simply walked past him, past the curious eyes of coworkers pretending not to stare. My heels echoed through the corridor, steady and deliberate, even though my legs felt like lead. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock my car. The grief I'd been holding back for days surged upward. Anger, betrayal, disbelief all tangled together. But beneath the chaos, a single thought formed, calm and precise. They thought I'd break. They didn't know who I was. My mother had always said, "Grace under fire, Claire." That's what sets you apart. I could almost hear her voice as I sat behind the wheel, staring at the glass facade of the building that had discarded me. I wiped my tears, steadied my breathing, and opened my phone. Not my lawyer. Not yet. There was someone else I needed to call. Someone who owed me a favor. When the line connected, a low voice answered. Claire? I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. They've made a mistake, I said evenly, and I'm going to need your help correcting it. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. Understood. How soon? Now. I hung up, my reflection faint in the windshield. Tired eyes, pale skin, determination flickering beneath exhaustion. The first rays of sunlight broke through the morning clouds, glinting off the building's glass panels. By noon, the executive floor would be in chaos. They just didn't know it yet. The city was still half asleep when I drove away from the parking lot. I didn't head home. Instead, I pulled into a quiet cafe 2 blocks away, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. My hands still shook as I typed the password. The bitterness in my mouth wasn't from the coffee. It was from the humiliation that clung to me like smoke. 14 years of loyalty, and they couldn't even wait until I'd finished mourning my mother. Not an email, not a conversation, not a shred of decency. Just trash bags. I clicked through my personal email, searching for a name buried in the past. David Harlow, a client I'd helped years ago during a merger that saved his logistics company from bankruptcy. He'd once told me, "If you ever need something, Claire, call me directly." I don't forget who saves me. I hadn't thought about that line until now. I typed out a brief message. David, it's Claire Donovan. Something happened at the firm. I need to meet. Today, if possible. It's urgent. Before I could close my laptop, a reply pinged back. My office, 10 a.m. Bring everything you've got. I glanced at the clock. 8:42. The phone call I'd made earlier wasn't to a lawyer or to HR. It had been to David's assistant. The man now sat on the board of Arcturus Holdings, one of the firm's biggest clients. If anyone could shake the foundation of the company that betrayed me, it was him. When I arrived at Arcturus Tower, David greeted me personally in the lobby. He looked older than I remembered. Gray hair now where there had been black, but the same sharp, calculating eyes. "Claire," he said, ushering me into his office. "You look like hell." "I buried my mother last week," I replied quietly. "And this morning I lost my job." He frowned, gesturing for me to sit. "What happened?" I told him everything. How I returned to find my name gone, my files reassigned, my position handed to Ethan Caldwell. I didn't cry. I simply laid out the facts the way I used to present quarterly reports. Concise, methodical, controlled. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Caldwell, you said?" That name rings a bell. He was my assistant. Barely 2 years out of school, David opened his laptop and typed rapidly. "Interesting, because this same Caldwell reached out to us last week. Wanted to renegotiate the contract on your merger project. Said he'd be our new point of contact moving forward." I blinked. "That project isn't even finalized yet. The confidentiality clauses?" "Exactly." He turned the screen toward me. He already sent a proposal, with revisions that would cost us an extra $3 million annually. My stomach dropped. He's trying to exploit the client base I built. David smiled coldly. "Then maybe it's time your old company learns what loyalty looks like." He made a call, short and clipped. "Put all current negotiations with Donovan and Pierce on hold. Tell the partners we're reviewing irregularities in their contract handling. And Claire, you'll come in as our independent consultant during this review." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said. "If Caldwell wants to play executive, let's see how he handles the fallout." Something inside me shifted then. For the first time in days, the fog of grief and exhaustion cleared. My mother used to say, "Don't fight anger with noise. Fight it with precision." I finally understood what she meant. By the time I left Arcturus, the sun was high. My inbox had already started to fill with forwarded emails from David's team. The review announcement was spreading quickly. By noon, it would reach Donovan and Pierce's executive floor, the same people who had thrown my name away like trash. I parked near the river, opened my laptop again, and watched the dominoes begin to fall. Within an hour, messages leaked to the press contacts still saved in my old email chain. Headlines started to form. Major client suspends $60 million contract with Donovan and Pierce pending internal audit. I imagined the panic in the boardroom. The CFO pacing. Darren calling emergency meetings. Ethan trying to explain why their biggest client had suddenly gone silent. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Claire?" The voice was hesitant. "Ethan." "What do you want?" I said flatly. "They're saying Arcturus pulled their account because of me." Did you talk to them?" I looked out over the water, the current dark and steady. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you made your choice. Please, Claire, I didn't know they were letting you go. HR said you weren't coming back, that you'd resigned." I almost laughed. "Resigned? Then you should have asked me yourself," I said, and ended the call. As the phone screen dimmed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not vengeance, exactly. Clarity. They'd taken my job while I was mourning. Now I'd taken their stability while they were celebrating. By noon, as I promised, chaos hit the entire executive floor. And it was only the beginning. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, missed calls, unknown numbers. I sat at my kitchen table in the same black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, cold coffee untouched beside me. The city was waking up again, but for the people at Donovan and Pierce, the morning was chaos. The first news headline hit before 8 a.m. Arcturus Holdings freezes $60 million contract pending audit over possible mismanagement. By 9 a.m., two more appeared, mentioning a senior-level shakeup and possible misconduct within strategic operations. I hadn't leaked anything. I didn't have to. The story had legs of its own. Still, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I wasn't after revenge for the sake of revenge. I just wanted the truth out. My laptop pinged with a message from David Harlow. It's working. Their PR team reached out. Expect contact soon. He wasn't wrong. At 9:26, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Darren Holt, HR director. I let it ring once before answering. Claire Donovan. A pause. Claire, we, need to talk. I could hear the strain in his voice. About what, Darren? The part where you fired me while I was arranging my mother's funeral? Or the part where you gave my job to someone half qualified? He exhaled sharply. No one fired you. There was a misunderstanding. The board assumed you were taking an extended leave. Extended leave? I repeated, incredulous. Then why did you remove my name from the door? That was a clerical error. Look, the situation with Arcturus is bad. The partners are asking questions. They need clarity. Then maybe they should have thought about clarity before they gutted the department. He hesitated, lowering his voice. The managing partner wants to meet. Today. They're offering to bring you back, temporarily, to help stabilize things. I stared out the window at the gray skyline. The same building that had discarded me now wanted my help. Send me the details, I said. I'll think about it. When I hung up, my pulse was steady, not racing. For the first time in days, I was in control. By noon, I was standing in the lobby of Donovan and Pierce again, wearing a dark blue suit and my mother's pearl earrings. I'd washed away the grief on my face with determination. The receptionist froze when she saw me. Ms. Donovan, I didn't realize you were alive? I finished for her with a small smile. Apparently neither did HR. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt endless. Every floor that passed reminded me how much of my life had been spent here. Late nights, missed birthdays, endless strategy sessions. I'd built my reputation one client at a time, only to have it erased overnight. When the elevator doors opened, I was met with silence. People whispered as I passed. It was strange walking through the wreckage of what used to be my home turf. Darren was waiting outside the conference room. His tie was crooked, his smile forced. Thank you for coming. Inside, the managing partner, Richard Pierce, sat at the head of the table. A man who'd once toasted my promotion now couldn't even meet my eyes. Claire, he began, voice measured. We seem to have had a miscommunication. I folded my hands on the table. That's one word for it. He cleared his throat. We value your contributions deeply. Unfortunately, some premature administrative actions were taken during your leave. In light of the Arcturus situation, we'd like your assistance in reassuring them that operations remain stable. So you want me to fix the problem you created? Temporarily, he said, avoiding my stare. You'll of course be compensated. I leaned back, studying them. You replaced me with someone who wasn't ready, stripped my access, and handed over sensitive data to a man who violated client trust. And now you want me to clean it up for you. Darren spoke quickly. We made a mistake. Let's find a solution instead of assigning blame, I almost laughed. Now they wanted to avoid blame. All right, I said finally, surprising them both. I'll help, on one condition. Richard glanced up. Which is? I get full access to the internal correspondence regarding my department. Emails, directives, personnel changes, everything from the past 60 days, Darren frowned. That's confidential information. So was my termination, I said evenly. You want me to fix your crisis? I need transparency. They exchanged uneasy glances, then Richard nodded. Fine. You'll have temporary reinstatement as a consultant. As I stood, I added quietly, and Darren? Make sure my name is back on the door before the end of the day. He swallowed. Of course. By late afternoon, I was back in my office, or rather, what had once been my office. My nameplate had been reinstalled hastily. My shelves were half empty, and the faint scent of cleaning solution lingered. I powered up the computer they'd assigned me and started digging through the internal archives. Most files were routine. Project updates, expense reports. But buried in a folder labeled Operations Transition, I found something that made my heart stop. A memo dated 2 weeks before my mother's death. Subject line, Strategic Realignment. Proposal to replace C. Donovan. The sender? Darren Holt. The recipient? Richard Pierce. And CC'd at the bottom, Ethan Caldwell. My hand froze on the mouse. They hadn't acted during my leave. They'd planned it. I exhaled slowly, the familiar calm settling back in. They thought reinstating me would save them, but they just handed me the proof I needed to bring everything crashing down. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's handwriting on the sympathy cards piled on my kitchen table. She used to tell me, "The truth always leaves footprints, Claire. You just have to look close enough." So I looked. By midnight, my apartment floor was covered with printouts, memos, and screenshots. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. My removal hadn't been spontaneous. It was a carefully executed move, timed to my mother's illness and funeral. The memo I'd found earlier wasn't the only one. There were emails between Darren and Richard discussing succession strategy, referencing Ethan as a cost-effective replacement. One note read, "She's emotionally compromised. Best to act while she's distracted with family matters." I stared at those words for a long time, the cursor blinking beside them. Emotionally compromised. That was their justification for gutting my career. I didn't cry. I just started building a timeline. From what I could piece together, Darren had convinced the board that I'd been planning to resign. Ethan was positioned as my successor, trained quietly in the background. Once I took personal leave for my mother's final weeks, they moved fast, reassigning my clients, removing my name, and rewriting internal reports to show voluntary transition. By the time I returned, I'd already been erased. But what they hadn't counted on was my access. As a consultant, I had full clearance again, something they'd never thought through in their panic to fix the Arcturus fallout. At 2 a.m., I plugged in an old flash drive, labeled Client Archive 2018, and began cross-referencing files. That's when I found the anomaly. One client account, Redbridge Technologies, listed under both my department and Ethan's. Duplicate invoices, altered signatures, and payment trails that didn't match. Someone had been double billing under my credentials. I checked the timestamps. The falsified invoices had been created the week of my mother's funeral. Whoever had done it assumed I'd never see them. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just internal betrayal. It was fraud. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. The building was eerily quiet. Security lights reflected off the polished floor, and the faint hum of servers filled the air. I made straight for my office, locked the door, and started printing evidence. Emails, invoices, digital trails. All of it. At 8:05, there was a knock. "Come in," I said without looking up. It was Ethan. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his usual arrogance replaced by panic. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, shutting the door behind him. "About what?" I asked, still typing. He hesitated. "I didn't know they were going to push you out like that." "I thought you'd—" "Resigned?" I cut in, glancing up. "Yes, I've heard the story." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They told me it was temporary, that you wanted to step back." I swear, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I studied him for a moment. His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I believed he was telling the truth, at least partially. "Then why did you approve duplicate invoices under my name?" I asked quietly. He froze. "What?" "Redbridge Technologies, 2 billing streams, One under my credentials, one under yours. Same deliverables. Same dates. His face drained of color. Claire, I didn't do that. Then who did? He swallowed hard. Darren. He said it was to smooth things over while transitioning accounts. He handled the invoices himself. And you didn't question it? I didn't think I could. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a printed copy of the memo that recommended my removal. Ethan stared at it like it was a live wire. You were a pawn, I said softly. But pawns still leave trails. He looked up, guilt and fear battling in his eyes. What are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago. I stood, gathering the printed documents into a neat stack. There's a compliance officer who handles fraud audits. You're going to call her and tell her everything. Then you're going to CC me, Claire. If you cooperate, I'll tell them you were manipulated. If you don't, I met his eyes. You'll go down with them. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll make the call. As he left, I finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of clarity. I forwarded every file I'd found to a secure drive labeled Mother. It was strange, but I felt like she was watching somehow, urging me to see it through. By 10 o'clock, the compliance department had the documents. By 11, an internal investigation was officially opened. And by noon, the whispers started. People avoided Darren in the hallway. The managing partner canceled his lunch meetings. Something was happening behind closed doors, and I was at the center of it. I looked at the office door that once carried my name and thought of my mother's voice again. The truth leaves footprints. And I had just shown them where to look. By Friday morning, the entire building hummed with unease. Conversations stopped when I walked past. Doors that were once left open were now half closed, muffling hurried whispers. The internal investigation had been announced late the previous night, and the email had sent shockwaves through the firm. Subject: compliance audit, confidential. It stated that all senior staff were to cooperate fully with auditors regarding potential irregularities in client billing and departmental transitions. Darren hadn't shown up that morning. His assistant claimed he was working remotely. Everyone knew what that meant. At 9:30, I was summoned to the main conference room. The managing partner, Richard Pierce, sat at the head of the table looking like he hadn't slept. Across from him were 2 compliance officers from headquarters and Ethan, visibly nervous but present. Ms. Donovan, one of the auditors began, thank you for coming. We understand you've been assisting with internal clarifications. I nodded. Yes, I've provided documentation of inconsistencies I discovered after my reinstatement. Richard leaned forward, clasping his hands. Claire, this situation has gotten out of control. We need to resolve it quietly before it damages the firm's reputation. I met his gaze. You mean before it damages your reputation? He exhaled slowly. If certain documents were misunderstood or mishandled, we can deal with it internally. There's no need to escalate. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. These are the signed invoices sent to Redbridge Technologies under my name while I was on bereavement leave. The timestamps placed their creation the same week I buried my mother. The auditors exchanged a look. Who had access to your credentials during that period? Darren Holt, I replied. He initiated the transition and approved the payments. Ethan spoke up, his voice trembling. He told me it was authorized by Richard. Richard turned sharply. That's absurd. The younger auditor raised an eyebrow. We'll verify authorization records in the system logs. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. I watched Richard's expression falter as he realized the tide had shifted. Then one of the auditor's phones buzzed. She stepped outside to answer it and returned moments later, her expression unreadable. That was headquarters, she said. They've just received confirmation from finance. Multiple transfers were made to a private account linked to a shell company under Darren Holt's name. Mr. Pierce, those transactions were signed off under your login credentials. The color drained from Richard's face. That's impossible. He must have forged. Your credentials required biometric verification. The auditor cut in quietly. The room went still. Ethan looked like he might be sick. I said nothing, just folded my hands on the table. Finally, I spoke. You let them remove me because you thought I was a liability. Grieving, distracted, easy to replace. And while you congratulated yourselves for being efficient, your HR director was bleeding money out of the firm right under your nose. Richard's voice cracked. Claire, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You built a culture that rewarded convenience over integrity. You made my grief your opportunity. And now it's your downfall. The auditors stood. Effective immediately, both Mr. Pierce and Mr. Holt are suspended pending legal review. Ms. Donovan, your cooperation has been instrumental in uncovering this. They gathered their files and left the room, leaving behind a heavy silence. Richard slumped in his chair, defeated. Ethan stared at the table, pale and shaken. I rose quietly. I'll be leaving my badge at reception, I said. My work here is done. Ethan looked up. Claire, I'm sorry. I know, I said softly. Make sure you learn from this. Ambition means nothing without conscience. As I walked down the corridor for the last time, staff members looked up from their desks, eyes wide with unspoken questions. No one said a word. I didn't need them to. Outside, the crisp March air filled my lungs. The same city that had once felt suffocating now felt wide open. My phone buzzed with a message from David Harlow. Arcturus reinstated the contract under your consulting company's name. Congratulations, Director Donovan. I stared at the message for a moment, the reality sinking in. I had my independence back, not as an employee, but as an equal. I drove straight to the cemetery. The lilies on my mother's grave had begun to wilt, their edges curling brown in the wind. I replaced them with fresh white ones and knelt beside the headstone. Mom, I whispered, you were right. The truth does leave footprints. For a long while, I just sat there, letting the quiet settle around me. Not as revenge, not as triumph, but as closure. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter, like the version of me who'd walked into that office a week ago had been buried alongside the past. As I reached the car, my phone rang again. It was one of the compliance officers. Ms. Donovan, we've completed the initial review. Headquarters is offering you the position of Regional Director for Compliance and Ethics. They said your integrity saved the firm. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I smiled faintly. Tell them I'll think about it. I ended the call and looked out over the horizon, where the morning light touched everything gold. My mother's words echoed once more in my mind. Grace under fire. Claire, that's what sets you apart. She was right. In the end, I hadn't needed to shout, threaten, or destroy. I'd simply shown them the truth and let it do the rest.